Good afternoon, good morning, and/or good evening, depending where you're dialing in from. We are very happy to see that we already have close to 60 people live in the first minute. Something I always do to cross-check if my audio is working correctly. Can the people who dialed in please use the chat function to write the country they're dialing in from? That's for me to double check if everyone can hear me well. Perfect. I see already Lithuania, Poland, England, India, Spain, UK. That's also very nice to see United States. Good morning to you, Brett. Great. So that's working. That's one. We are very happy to have you on today's expert panel, where we will tackle how to approach the science-based targets in 2026. We have a great lineup and great panelists joining us today, which we will introduce in a bit. Before we do so, we do have a few house rules I wanna mention. There's this chat functionality that you already used for the countries, but there's also a Q&A section. During the webinar, please feel free to use this Q&A section to already put your questions in there. Towards the end of the panel, there is around 15 to 10 minutes for us to answer those questions. Also, the questions we didn't have the time for to answer, we will follow up with you via email afterwards. So don't wait until the end of the session to put the questions there, and already feel free to use that Q&A functionality. It's very exciting to be hosting today around the topic of science-based targets. At the end of each webinar, you get the opportunity to vote for the next topic you want us to talk about. Last time, the science-based targets was the big winner, so here we are today, talking you through how to approach this best in 2026. A very quick overview about Dazzle. For the people who are not familiar, what we do with Dazzle, we have a curated network of independent sustainability professionals, and we help sustainability teams globally with hiring these professionals on demand whenever they need an expert to execute on the different topics. Right, let's dive in. With me is Farah, who is our global community manager, and I will hand over to her to lead most of the discussion, but also introduce herself and tell a bit more about the session of today.
Thank you, Robert. Very, very excited to be here. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our session. A very quick introduction from my side. I'm Farah. I'm Dazzle's global community manager. And as Robert already gave an overview, Dazzle's community is truly global, truly amazing. It's a vetted community of top sustainability professionals from all over the world. And essentially what I do is manage the entire life cycle of community management, from recruitment to engagement. And I'm very happy to be here. And we have a very interesting topic to cover, quite a technical one. So I am equally excited. I hope everyone is as equally excited as I am to learn more. And with me on this webinar are three panelists: Suzanne from PostNL, Leon, who is a independent professional specializing on SBTi, and not only that, and Oliver from SBTi itself. Before we dive in, I would like to ask the panelists to quickly introduce themselves. Suzanne, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Suzanne de Brigy, and I am lead environment within PostNL Group. So we're responsible for our net zero strategy.
Thank you. Oliver?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Ollie, and I'm the Europe Engagement Manager at SBTi, where I focus on driving the adoption of science-based targets by European companies.
Thank you. Leon?
Yes, hi everyone. Also excited to be here. So I'm a sustainability professional specializing in climate. So I've worked in sustainability consulting. I worked for Unilever for 4 years as climate strategy manager. And for the past 6 months or so, I'm now working as an independent sustainability professional as part of the Dazzle community.
Amazing, thank you. Now, before we dive into the discussion, we would like to do a quick pulse check. Robert, may I ask you to launch your pulse, please? We just wanted to understand what the audience is, want to focus on, just to understand what the pain points are, what the challenges are, so that we can also guide our discussion, perhaps to make it more helpful to the majority of you. And
Can you
there
see
they
the poll?
are. Yes,
Yes.
I can. Yeah.
That's great. I see we have 100 people live, so I'm very curious, and I also would love to ask everyone to engage, as Farah said, so we can tailor the discussion as much as we can. First question is, how would you describe your company's current status with SBTi? 4 options here, from we haven't started yet to already validated targets.
And I think so far we have a winner. We're exploring SBTi, but haven't submitted target. So then you are at the right place, I would say. Definitely, you'll have better clarity after this webinar.
Second question is, what is your biggest challenge in meeting SBTi requirements today? This is for the companies or sustainability teams who have already started.
Understanding evolving SBTi criteria and pathways. Also amazing, because we actually have asked Oliver to, after these polls, we will dive in. Oliver will present to us what SBTi is in a nutshell. I hope that will be very helpful as well. And the last question is, what are you most concerned about when approaching SBTi in 2026? And here we seem to have a clear winner, right, Robert? Developing and delivering a credible climate transition plan. A hot topic, I would say.
Oh, sets the scene.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Yeah, let's dive in.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. Next, I'm going to give word to Oliver to quickly take us through what SBTi is. I'm sure we all know what it is, but for beginners like myself, it's going to be very helpful to have a better understanding of what exactly we're talking about here. So, Oliver, over to you.
Great, thank you, Farah. And I'm not sure if we've got any slides, but I would.
Yes.
We do. Are they coming? Great. Yeah, just excited to share about today's session, what you need to do for SBTi in 2026. And this is a really big year for us in SBTi. We've got a new standard launching, version 2.0 of our initial standard is launching later this year. So just to set the scene, the SBTi is a corporate climate action organization that enables companies and financial organizations to play their part in combating the climate crisis. We were actually founded in the run-up to the Paris Climate Agreement, when experts from leading environmental NGOs decided that the private sector lacked a way to understand how to enact the goals in the Paris Agreement. And at the time, the goal was to limit global heating to well below 2 degrees and pursue ways to limit it to 1.5 degrees. And what they developed was the science-based targets. And today we develop standards, tools, and guidance that enables companies and financial institutions to set robust and credible greenhouse gas emission reduction targets grounded in climate science. And all of our standards, tools, and guidance documents are free to use, and we want everyone to participate. And that's why calls like today are really helpful to help spread the word and encourage companies to set targets and understand what they need to do. And on the next slide, just to outline those initial partners that we worked with that actually launched the Science-Based Target Standards Initiative. And so that's why we were set up. And let's talk a bit about what is a science-based target. So in the simplest terms possible, on the next slide, a science-based target is a public-facing target that a corporation sets to communicate its ambition to decarbonizing at a rate that's consistent with what climate science deems necessary to limit temperature warming to 1.5 degrees, which is the limit that the global scientific community has agreed upon is essential to avoid the most catastrophic impacts of global heating. And it's based on, a company's science-based targets is set based on their unique GHG emissions inventory and modeled to reflect that company's selected base year and target year to enable it to meet net zero by 2050. And companies can set either near-term targets, which are 5 to 10 years, or set a net zero target for the long term, which could be anywhere from today to 2050 at the latest. So that's what they are. On the next slide, we just got a very brief outline of how you might set a target, and this is the standard route. So this is for organizations, large organizations with over 10,000 tons of CO2 across Scope 1 and Scope 2. If you have less than that, you can take this SME route, which is slightly lighter in terms of demands. So you need to register, and if you don't have your GHGs today, it doesn't matter. You just register and get your information up on the website, and then you commit to setting a target. Then you can develop your company emission reduction target using our standards and tools. And then once you're ready, you then submit via the validation portal, and I'm sure we'll talk about that process today. And that's when our team will review your targets and ensure that they're in line with the climate science. And then finally, when those are approved, you can communicate, and then you disclose annually your progress against those targets. So I've outlined quite a complicated process in a simple way there, and we can dive into more detail today. And then just on the final slide, I just wanted to talk a bit about how you can learn more around science-based targets. So last year, we launched a Science-Based Targets Initiative Academy, which was the first of its kind for training and certification. It consists of 2 key learning hubs. There's an onboarding hub that's for newcomers, so for those who know nothing about it. And then there's a practitioners hub for professionals with some experience in science-based target setting for you to learn more. And the learning modules in the onboarding hub are for free, and so are the first modules in the practitioners hub. And then finally, there's a certification hub for experts. So this isn't a learning hub, but an assessment hub. So experts have been working on science-based target setting and would like to get a certificate to be able to show their experts can take the assessment in this certification hub. And then we will publicly list those who have been certified on our website, and you can join the world's first register of science-based target setting experts. And so this QR code will take you directly to that page there. And I know at the end of this call, we can talk about a partnership offer that we have for the Dazzle audience.
Great. Thank you, Ollie. We just wanted to include this context real quick because we also know there are companies in here who are perhaps new to science-based targets. And as you saw on the final slide, we have, as Dazzle, also teamed up with the Science-Based Targets Initiative to make sure that the freelancers from our network are going through the certification so that we have these SBTi certified consultants in here. Farah, I think we should dive into the panel discussion.
Yes, I think we can start. Exactly. This is going to be an open discussion, so anytime any of our panelists wants to chime in, please feel free to do so. The last thing we want to do is have a very rigid structure where people do not feel free to speak. But at the same time, we will structure our discussion around 7 tips that we have that Leon and Oliver were kind enough to share with us. And we're also going to be very interested in hearing Susanna's experience with these from the industry side. But I say, let's get started. So the first one we have here is shift from spend-based to activity-based data. And the idea here is that many companies are still relying on spend-based emission factors for Scope 3. However, SBTi and auditors are starting to expect more granular activity-based data. And I'd like to hear from you, Leon. What exactly, how does this shift looks like in practice, and what do you usually recommend to the clients you work with?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it's technically acceptable according to Greenhouse Gas Protocol to calculate your Scope 3 emissions using a spend-based approach. But in the long term, when it comes to tracking progress, when it comes to making claims about reductions, that's where spend-based calculations become fairly problematic, specifically because they are just tied to spend. So if reduction or emissions reduce because of reductions in spend or other factors that are completely detached from real world GHG reduction, that's problematic. So as challenging as it might be, there really is a need to move to activity-based GHG accounting, so using actual procurement volumes, energy consumption, etc. So that your emissions calculations are directly tied to your actual business activities and not just spend.
Mm-hmm. Oliver, do you have anything to add to that?
No, just to echo that, and I'm sure everyone on the call hears the same thing, which is in order to drive action, we need to have understanding of the data. And in fact, in the new draft version 2, we've kind of outlined quite a clear hierarchy in that we want to see supplier-specific data as preferred with spend-based as a last resort. And all of that is to do with driving action on decarbonisation.
Thank you. Susanna, I'm curious to hear your thoughts, since you're probably the one who has to deal with the actual real-life implications of the shift. Do you want to share with us?
So I can follow the reasoning for wanting more actual data, of course. So it's going to help in actually reducing our emissions. On the other part, I think with you depend on not only large companies that are most likely are actively reducing their emissions, have their data in order, but we have about 8,000 suppliers, for example, and it's just impossible to expect for them to be on the same level as we are on their GHG reporting. So it's just a little bit more difficult. On the other hand, if I'm more positive, I think for about 70% or something of our scope 3 emissions, we already have actual data. So it's not impossible, but I think it's just too ambitious to expect for your entire scope 3 to have this data available. But I think there's a lot more possible. I think what doesn't help is maybe more strict, not so strict regulations. So I think we're going to discuss a CSRD, for example, in a little bit. But if you see that a lot of companies are excluded from other reporting qualifications, it doesn't help this process of getting more actual data, because they don't all have this on their agenda. They don't feel like necessary to have this information, so it doesn't help. So you really have to rely on their goodwill to have all your suppliers, all your partners on the same page. So this for me is now the most challenging, I think, when looking at my net zero plan.
Interesting. You mentioned data availability and data quality, and I think a lot of people, when they're considering, SBTi alignment, one of the biggest challenges is that, we don't have the data, or the data that we have is not perfect, so to speak. So I would be curious to hear how you dealt with that, and where do you find the balance between, this is good enough, and now we can, move on and proceed with the next steps, or when you say, no, we still need to dwell on this and make this a little bit better.
The key is always start small and have the ambition to improve every year. So it seems impossible. I think there's you can always start with something. I do have to say, and I just realized I didn't really introduce PostNL as a company, and with all this international audience, maybe I have to elaborate a little bit on that. So as the name might tell you, we are in the business of parcel delivery and mail delivery. That's like our core activity. So most of our emissions also come from transport, as you can imagine. Where in the beginning we only had information about our own fleet, and I think over time we were able to get that data from even our smallest partners, who only have 1 or 2 vans driving for us. Even then we were able to get actual data from them. But I do have to say, we started this process, I think it was back in 2007 when we first started thinking about GHG emissions. And we had our first near-term targets in 2019. So we had a bit of a head start. And now, so that part is covered. And then we have, of course, the other emissions when we expanded our scope 3 data. It's a lot more difficult. So, but start somewhere where it's easy, and then you sort of get the hang of it. And I do think that when asking your partners and your suppliers, that's already a good start. So you don't have to demand it. Just start the conversation first, and you might be surprised at what's already out there.
Thank you. That's very interesting. It kind of feeds into our second tip, which I would love to hear from you, Oliver, which is prepare for the validation backlog. So there is quite a bit of waiting time sometimes when you're applying for SBTi validation. It can be a bottleneck. So I guess what Susanna just mentioned about starting small, what is the advice you would give to applicants in terms of when to start? When can they say, okay, now we have enough data to actually apply, and the rest we will do while we're waiting?
That's a good question. I want to tackle the validation backlog. So we historically have had a very serious validation backlog. And if you probably applied 2 years ago, you might have waited 7 or 8 months to get a reply. So currently, I know that if you were to submit today on the validation portal, you would get a slot for validation in May. So that's a 4-month turnaround. So there is a little backlog, and we're hoping to get that down. But that's where we are today, and that's purely, and I suppose good news for the planet is that's because of the amount of companies that are looking to set science-based targets. What I would say is you can register now, and that's not valid. That's not setting your validation timeline in process. Register now, get your details on the website, and then set up a company account, put your details in. And if you're thinking about setting science-based targets this year, then do that, and then get your greenhouse gas emissions in order. And as soon as you're feeling comfortable with that, then you can start your validation process. I would say, don't see us as hardline examiners. We're here to help companies submit science-based targets. We're not here to stop companies setting science-based targets. And so we want to help you to do that. Obviously, we want strong data, but if you have any questions before your data is finished, send an email to info@ and outline your concern. And if you've got questions about your greenhouse gas accounting, I think that's possibly something you want to organize. That's not something that we can help with, but we can help with any questions that you've got around your baseline, about specifics around your scope 3 categories, what you should include, anything around our draft wording that doesn't make sense to you, let us know, and we can get back to you. So yeah, don't be frightened of getting in touch with us. We want to help companies set science-based targets.
Amazing. I think it's so great that you say that, and I hope everyone in the audience got a little bit of hope hearing that they do not have to wait, for perfection before they can apply, but it's a process, so to speak. Leon, how do you support your clients in through this process? What has your experience been?
Well, so where this tip came from is, when it comes to getting your, GHG inventory in order, as Ollie put it, it's almost an endless process of continuous improvement. And so if you really want to wait until your inventory is absolutely perfect, you're as accurate as can be, everything is perfectly documented, it's going to delay things tremendously. Ollie, correct me if I'm wrong, but as long as, what you submit is, if there's any changes less than 5%, when you kick off the validation process, that's okay. And correct me if I'm wrong, you are allowed to submit an updated inventory, as long as there hasn't been any materially structural changes happening in your business, and as long as any changes in methodologies or whatnot hasn't caused your emissions to fluctuate by more or less than 5%. So if you feel you're 95% there, often the last 5% is what takes the most amount of work, then I would say, submit your form in the portal, get your validation slot, and then that gives you 4 months to get your ducks in order and see where you can possibly make some improvements in data sources, methodologies, etc.
Amazing, thank you.
I just agree with that. Like we've got a validation team, and then we've got the technical team who will review the validation. And so your first port of call when you submit for validation is that validation team who you will have a one-person contact with, and you can ask them those questions. You can share those concerns, and they might say, "Oh, it sounds like you need a little more time. I'll push you further down the funnel." Or if not, they can reassure you that everything's okay. So yeah, submit for validation as soon as you feel like you've got your greenhouse gas accounting ready, and start that conversation with us.
Great. Sounds really reassuring, I would say. So we talked about data, specifically about the data quality and specifically for scope 3 emissions. Now, one of the feedback that I personally receive a lot when talking about scope 3 is that we don't know how to get that data from our suppliers. So usually the conversation is, okay, maybe we'll send them a survey, or we'll send them a questionnaire to fill out. And I think we are in a process where we need to move beyond that and actually transition from purely just engagement or having conversations or sending out questionnaires to actually setting contractual commitments and targets. So Oliver, can you maybe shed a little light on what SBTi stands on this, and what is the best practice from your point of view?
I wish I could answer this one. This isn't something that like SBTi has a perspective on, but I can answer from my own experience is that like I just echo what you're saying. Like all I've seen is that companies are asking their suppliers to do this, and it's very difficult to set this out in contracts. SBTi, obviously, we want strong data sources. We want to move from spend-based to activity-based. However, there's no mandate, and the wider that we can grow the network and the wider that we can grow understanding of greenhouse gas accounting, the more likely it is that companies will be able to provide this. But I'm afraid I can't comment from SBTi. Just to say that I wish that there was more education and awareness across the board, and I suppose it was easier to do.
Susanna, how about you? What has your experience been like working with suppliers? Because you already mentioned that you did, so I'm very curious to hear about the details.
So I noticed from both sides. So both our customers demanding more information from us as we are part of their scope 3, and also the other way around, that we depend on information from our suppliers, for example. I think the best thing to start with is to communicate this ambition. So I know you're a little bit more far ahead. You want to go to contractual targets. I think that's maybe one step too far for a lot of companies. So it's that's just my personal experience for now. However, it can help to say that you as a company do have these targets that you need to meet. This is not negotiable. So in order for your partners or your customers to work together with you, then at one point they need to step up and also provide this information. So I think it's especially when you start, maybe this is not something that you want to demand from your partners right away. But I think in preparing for your, because I think most of the audience here today don't have validated targets yet, this is the time to engage. This is just don't start until you have them. You obviously have some picture of where you want to stand. Communicate this and be as transparent as you can be as what to expect from them. I think my experience, a lot of our partners were not unwilling. They just didn't have the means or the tools. They didn't have the information. We are starting to help our suppliers with this as well, just to give them the information. What do we exactly need? And I think a survey, as you mentioned, is not the right tool. Basically because it's very difficult to understand them. And I know from the other side, at one point I got like 10, 20 different surveys from customers that were all demanding something different. So maybe some a standard information, or really helping your partners. Okay, what do you need? What do I need? And try to prevent to over ask them. Because I already also saw a lot of surveys coming my way. I'm like, this information, even if I want to provide it, this is going to tell you nothing about our GHG emissions. And sometimes they just copied it from somewhere. So don't over ask them. Start as soon as you can to engage with your partners and your suppliers to say, this is the direction I'm heading. This is what we're going to eventually expect from you, and really offer help where you can if you are more expert on the topic.
That's very interesting. Since you said PostNL is operating globally, and you probably have to deal with international suppliers, I am assuming you met some kind of resistance when you just started this journey. I would be very curious to hear how you tackled that resistance. And because you said, we're not in a position to demand, but at the same time, obviously, you don't want to be lenient. So where do you find that balance?
So if you look at the actual data that we have, most of them are from our suppliers that work within Europe. So I think there was not that much resistance, more just they didn't have the information yet. They were unaware that we were going to demand this information. So this is just a process, but I am still optimistic about that. And we do operate globally. And luckily, I think in the transport sector, there's a lot of information available on transport means of transportation and emission factors. So this is not, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's not the biggest challenge that we have.
Amazing. I think that's very reassuring to hear. Oliver, I see you have your hand up. So do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo, I suppose, that it's the challenge is that we have so many businesses have so many suppliers, and the SBTi has recognized that it's not effective for us to go after every single supplier for information and decarbonization. That every organizations do that. So in the new draft, we've changed it from organizations having to have a net zero plan for 67% of their scope 3 inventory to now only focusing on the categories which are greater than 5% of their total scope 3 emissions. So what I would say, and Suzanne, I'm sure, is doing a brilliant job at this in PostNL, is focus on those organizations where you can drive an impact. Like those are the ones that you need to partner with. Those are the ones that you want to be not just getting their emissions data from, but also having conversations about how do we decarbonize transport, because transport's a big emission factor for Post, for example.
Amazing. Leon, you work across different clients in different industries, and you support them throughout this journey. Can you give us maybe a couple of tips about how you tackle this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, to build on to what Suzanne and Ollie also mentioned, it doesn't make sense to try target your entire supply base, especially if they number in the thousands or often tens of thousands. So, for example, at my time in Unilever, 40-odd thousand raw material and packaging suppliers. It's just impossible to require standard blanket requirements from all of them. And so we managed to identify just the top 300 suppliers that contributed almost 60% to Unilever's footprint. And so that's what I always advise our clients is, identify your most material suppliers. Often there's a huge tail that you can prioritize at another time. And then as a second step, potentially through surveys, simple questionnaires, even publicly available information, see if you can determine their climate maturity. Some companies are very much at the early stages and have not set any targets or are not even reporting their emissions, and some other suppliers might be just as advanced or even more advanced as you when it comes to climate maturity. And then tailor your approach accordingly. So those that are more mature, they might already be capable of providing supplier PCF or product PCF data. The suppliers at the lower end of maturity, they would probably need some support and resources if you're able to provide that. So identify your most material suppliers and tailor your approach according to their climate maturity.
Amazing, thank you. The next step actually that we were about to discuss is, I think, a very interesting one, because currently companies have to deal with so many different frameworks, that sometimes overlap, sometimes they don't, and I think there's a lot of confusion. So, Susanna, I'd be very curious to hear from you about how you find the balance between tackling different frameworks, specifically, for example, since you're located in Europe, CSRD, which is simplified, but it still has pretty challenging demands. And since you're also aligned with SBTi, so do you see any way where you can merge sort of the efforts to deal with both, or do you think, oh, these are two separate things and we need to have two separate resources and teams dealing with these?
I think the CSRD process, so we're going to report on CSRD for the second year, finishing up our annual report right now. And I think having validated targets, science-based targets, were a huge help in completing the environmental parts of this of our sustainability disclosures, simply because there's like one section, I don't want to get too technical, but if you look at E14, where it specifically asks about the targets that you have, are they science-based? How are they constructed? I think having the validated targets put you in a big head start already, because you already thought about it. And I think for us, it's been a really good basis for our climate transition plan, because it all has to add up to reaching our goals. And it's all measured, it's all intertwined. So I think it was a big help having them already in place before we had to go through the first round of CSRD requirements.
Amazing. You mentioned climate transition plan. So I think this is one of the tips that we were going to discuss. But now that you mention it, I'd love to hear more about when do you think the decision came that, okay, it's now time for us to start with a climate transition plan? How did you get the leadership buy-in? Because I think this is one of the things that a lot of companies struggle with. Was it driven mostly by compliance, or was it something that you proactively wanted to, tackle as a large organization? Can you walk us through the history of that?
A good answer would obviously be that we were very motivated to do this ourselves, but let's be honest, compliancy, especially as a big company, always plays a part. And it just makes, I think now, so the requirements and the scope of CSRD is going to be simplified. But at the time that we started, we were part of the first companies that had to comply. We didn't know that, so we went for it all in. And you basically have to say, what's your climate transition plan? It's like the first question in the CSRD. So I didn't feel like there was room to not have it. So it just progressed. And to be honest, we already have a strategic plan which already had climate targets incorporated. Maybe not through the full scope of our science-based targets right now and the full scope of CSRD, but we always had sustainability in our own strategic planning, which is, I think, what you should end up doing. I mean, it's good to have a climate transition plan, but it should always be part of your strategic plan as a company. It should all add up in the end. So for us, now having our climate targets is just as much as we want our profits, we also want to reach our climate goals, and they're just next to each other. And I think that's the ideal situation. It gives a lot of nice discussions as well in terms of what comes first. But this is going to make sure that you have a nice balance between doing good for the environment, but also having a sustainable company.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you. And thank you for the honesty, by the way. Leon, what about you? Because, I think it's very interesting to hear from you, since you work with so many different companies, different sizes, different compliance requirements. What is your sense?
Yeah, so I think, Susan, you make a good point that compliance is often, the initial driving force to kickstart, the development of climate transition action plan and things like that. But it's often also a very useful way to get commitment and buy-in from various functions within your business to contribute or play their role towards achieving your various targets. All of a sudden now there would be, well, depending on the level of detail that you go into, but there could be a transition action plan in the public that outlines, what you're going to do to decarbonize logistics, to decarbonize your factories, warehouses, how you're going to further develop your products or services to be lower carbon. And all of a sudden, those functions, feel like they have a role to play, and a public-facing role in that plan, and also in achieving your targets.
Amazing. Oliver, can you chime in here? I'd love to hear from you about, first of all, is there any harmonization effort currently happening between the existing frameworks and SBTi? And also about the climate transition plan, since this was also one of the tips that you provided us about preparing for the SBTi's corporate net zero standard. So I'd love to hear from you. You're muted, by the way.
Not specifically about the climate transition plan, although I previously worked in a large corporate, so I really love the fact that we can get this on senior stakeholders' agenda outside of the sustainability silo. What I would say is that, yes, there are teams within SBTi always working on interoperability to try to ensure that our standards talk to all of the other sector standards or questionnaires that exist out in the realm that mean that sustainability professionals don't have to go and duplicate information across lots of different silos. So that's really what I can share here.
Okay, amazing. And what about the final tip? Would you like to tell us a little bit more about SBTi's corporate net zero standard?
Yes, I would. So the final tip is to talk about preparing for the Net Zero Standard 2.0, which is the first major revision due to be finalized in Q2 this year. And we're revising this to ensure it aligns with emerging best practices, the first time this happened since 2021, as we've taken on feedback from leading companies that adopted this standard. And some of the proposed changes aim to address key challenges in implementing and achieving net zero emissions targets. So I'm going to talk really briefly about some of those key changes, and those are all available on the draft that we've just done the second stakeholder engagement with, that hopefully we can share in the chat or in the email after this call. So you may have seen some of these consultations, but I wanted to share the key proposals, and there are a number of them. So the first is base year selection. So in the initial draft, you could pick a base year. In this new draft, we propose that companies choose the most recent year with comprehensive data on emissions as their new target base year. So if you're setting your targets for the first time in 2027 and you have emissions data for 2026, we'd want you to choose that as your base year. And then important to note is that if you already have a target and you're revalidating under the new draft, you won't have to reset your base year. You could choose to, but you don't have to. The second thing is that near-term targets shall cover a 5-year period. So initial validation, you could set targets for near term with a much shorter time frame to align with your business reporting cycle. So those are kind of two foundational ones. And then specific within emission target setting, the first is around scope 1 and 2. So now companies need to set separate targets to cover scope 1 emissions separately to scope 2 emissions. And in the current standard, you can do those for both. You can have a target for both of those together. So you might choose to be net zero in scope 1 and 2 by 2040. Now we're asking for a target for each independently. And that was because we found that many companies are combining them and therefore not addressing scope 1 emissions because there's such a much smaller portion of most companies' combined emissions. So this is really to get organizations to focus on scope 1 emissions just as much as scope 2 emissions. And then the largest change in the draft that you're likely to see is in scope 3, which I've touched on, which is we're looking at focusing on companies looking at targeting emission reduction based on the relevance of emissions rather than the fixed threshold. So we're refining it from, as I mentioned, 67% target needs to cover to any category which is defined as equaling 5% or more of your total scope 3 emissions. And this is intended to encourage companies to take action on areas which are material to their business. And there are also a wider range of options in how you set targets in that way, whether it's intensity reduction or whether it's a linear reduction. And there are 8 total options that you can take there. So those are the key areas. I can talk more about other areas if we have time. Maybe we want to talk about how we propose companies take ownership of their ongoing emissions. But yeah, there's a number of key changes, but hopefully those changes help make it easier for companies to set targets and to focus on emission reduction in the areas that are most material to their organization.
And is this already out there? Like, do the companies already have to use the standard, or is there a timeline for this?
So the draft is still being finalized, and we hope to have it published as a final standard in Q2 in June of 2026. And from the date of publishing, companies have until the end of 2027 in which they could still set their net zero target or near-term target in the current draft. So they wouldn't have to take into consideration any of this new standard. Only from the 1st of January 2028 would any new target need to be aligned with the new standard. So companies that are considering setting their target now, you could set it either under the version 1.3, which is the current, or under version 2.0, which should be out, as I say, in June. So if you were to to submit for validation today, you probably get in line to be able to set under both standards. What I would say is you probably need a bit of time once that standard lands to figure out what your net zero target would be. So if you're thinking about which route to take, it might be worth reading version 2.0 in a bit more detail to clarify which one you'd like to set your target under.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I think we can wrap up our discussion here because we want to also open the Q&A session. We want to give a chance to the audience to ask their questions. But before we do that, I'd like to, have one final sort of, tip or advice or takeaway from this discussion from each of you, since all of you bring such diverse perspectives to this discussion. I think it's just going to be so helpful for our audience members. Susanna, do you want to go first?
I just wanted to emphasize that I'm not going to say that this was an easy assessment. Sorry, Ollie, but it was quite difficult and challenging. But it has brought it made other parts of our job much easier. So for CSRD, but also we are a commercial company, so we have a lot of customers demanding that you have science-based targets. So and it's really helped us in our growth as well. And I think it's great that in this conversation the emphasis was on everything, that all the tooling, all the assistance is there from SBTi. So I think it's getting easier and easier as more companies are adopting these targets.
I love the positive outlook. Thank you for that, Susanna. Leon, do you want to chime in here? What would your advice be?
Yeah, sure. I'll maybe give a bit of a boring one, but I wouldn't discount and underestimate the importance of good data management and governance within your organization, because it seems the crux of the problem, as we've discussed today, is scope 3 especially. Calculations are very technical and quite challenging, and so with all the clients I work with, we always try and ensure that processes are robust. I often work on a good documentation. Inventory management document, for example, is a very important document to have in place to clearly outline roles, responsibilities, data sources, methodologies. And not only does this support your governance of GHG accounting internally, but it's of course also super important for when you undergo audit and assurance and SBTi validation, of course.
Okay, thank you for that. Oliver, do you want to have the last word?
Yes, thank you. And this has been a really great discussion. I would say that we set up the Science-Based Target Initiative to encourage businesses to set climate action and set a target to do good for the planet alongside those countries in the UN Paris Climate Agreement. And no matter where you are in your journey, I think it's a really powerful thing to hold up in your organization and say, this is what we want to focus on, not just for the sustainability professionals, but for everyone. What I found is that it's a really powerful lever in conversations with people outside of that profession. So if you're on the fence, if you're not sure about it, just consider how much it matters to you and the organizations, and register and have conversations with us today, because we're here, as I say, to help champion companies setting science-based targets, and we're not there to stop you doing that. So see us as an open door, and the validation team as your partners to setting those targets.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think that's very reassuring. I think we can open the Q&A session. Before we do that, Robert, do you want to launch the poll just to ask the audience what the topic should be that we are going to cover at the next webinar?
Yep, I will. Maybe we can just first start with the Q&A, and then I will do that afterwards.
Okay, for sure, for sure. I think the first 3 questions, Oliver, I just had a quick look at them, are for you. So perhaps we can just quickly cover them, because the first question is regarding the spend-based versus activity-based data requirements. At the moment, it's mandatory to have scope 1 and 2 in activity-based for SBTi submission. Is there a plan in place to slowly make it mandatory for scope 3 to also be in activity-based for submission?
That's quite a quick one, because there isn't currently a plan in place to do that. And I think we touched on it earlier that the biggest challenge is around gathering that data from suppliers, and organizations have so many suppliers. So no, I don't think there will be a plan in place, but we are looking for organizations to start to gather that data. We can't make it mandatory.
Okay. The second question is, could the base year be different between scope 1, 2, and 3?
No, it has to be the same base year.
And the third one, why can an SME not create a commitment letter?
This is an interesting one. The reason why is because the commitment letter was set up when we first started the Science-Based Targets Initiative, and it was to drive up momentum in large corporations where it's really difficult to drive change. So by getting to set a commitment letter, we started getting the wheels in motion to get organizational leaders to actually set targets. So it was almost the low barrier to just get something happening. So we haven't got a commitment letter for SMEs because we acknowledge that there isn't that large organizational hierarchy to stop the change happening. So we want to encourage SMEs to set science-based targets, and we know that when they're setting the science-based targets, they are committed.
Amazing, thank you. I think the fourth one, Susanna, maybe you would be the right person to take this one. How do you make sure that improving data quality and real reduction are not mixed up?
I'm not sure if that's a risk. I think improving your data quality is essential. I think from the moment that you start, there's going to be a lot of estimates, scaling, etc. So you want to improve. Yeah, so I think both will exist in your process to net zero.
So it doesn't have to be a trade-off, essentially.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. The next question says, what about material-based emissions? Leon, do you want to tackle this one?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, I was thinking the same, but I thought maybe you will. Not sure. Priyanka, do you want to elaborate on that a little bit so that we can answer this one? And
Maybe.
and we can
maybe
move to the
while we
next one.
wait for Bianca, then in the meantime, I see the polls are ready. So as a short break, almost as a commercial break, I would say during the Q&A, let us quickly launch the poll now that we have everyone still here, where you can vote for which topic you would like us to tackle in the next webinar. So as we said in the very beginning, how we work with these webinars is that you determine which topic we host our next expert panel about. So we have 4 options here, which is CDP, very relevant. I believe all the scores are just live. ESG reporting, as it's the beginning of the year, social impact, or a topic we also discussed lightly with Susanna, leadership buy-in. So how to get the board on board. So we look forward to the votes. So I would like to ask everyone to select the option they have the biggest challenge with or would like to learn more about. And then we will get to work. I see we have
A winner.
most responses in, and a winner, I believe, which is leadership buy-in. So that's interesting. And still some final votes.
Topic.
Yes, right. And that was it.
One of the biggest challenges we have as sustainability professionals. So not surprised to see that.
Yeah,
there's a lot to discuss about it. So let's dive in for the last 5 minutes to answer the final questions from the audience.
Yes, for sure. I think next one, Oliver already covered. Does SBTi have any additional plans to further improve the validation waiting timeline? You already talked about it. You said it's now down to 4 months, and it's something that you are working on.
We're still investing in getting more people on board. So yes.
Okay, amazing. The next question is, my company is constructing an industrial facility over the next several years. Operations aren't expected to commence until 28-29. First, SBTi applicable at our stage of development? Or is SBTi applicable at our stage of development? If so, how would we establish emission targets with SBTi, knowing that emissions could only be estimated, forecasted at this time? Leon, do you want to maybe take this one. As a consultant, I think you would be, best positioned to do so.
Yeah, sure. It's an interesting question. So, I mean, considering that it's under construction, then I presume there'd be no Scope 1, 2 emissions associated with that facility yet. There would perhaps already be Scope 3 capital goods associated emissions, depending on how the financials are done. But it is a challenging one. Assuming that, or let's say the facility, once it comes online, would change the baseline by more than 5%, then that would be a structural change to your baseline and would require you to resubmit and validate your targets. Or correct me if I'm wrong, Ollie. So yeah, I mean, sure, Ollie, I'm not sure if there's a way around that. I can't recall if SBTi allows your base year to sort of account for an estimate of future operations, but to the best of my knowledge, it's
no, I think what you would do is set a target based on your current base year, and then once you've created your operational facility, then you would rebaseline, given that your emissions would change probably larger than 5%. So yeah, I would say to do it today and then rebaseline once your facility is up and running and you have a more accurate emissions for your larger organizational emission.
Yeah. It depends on the size of the facility. So if you think it will change your emissions by more than 5%, then it's likely you'll need to rebaseline.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. I think this one would probably be best for you, Susanne. What type of data are you supposed to use to identify the top suppliers in terms of emission in Scope 3 before actually receiving actual emissions data from them? And perhaps you can here speak from your own experience how you identify the top suppliers in terms of emissions.
Spend. So that's our first identification. So where is it? That was like when you don't have any information yet, you look at that, and then you do have to do a sanity check because sometimes that doesn't really equal the environmental impact. But if you have nothing, then I think spend is just a good start to identify where your emissions are if you want to compare suppliers. So for us, of course, we have a lot of emissions in our Scope 1 because we have a large fleet, and it was more also in our Scope 3 for outsourced transport. But when we looked at our products and services, then we had to look at suppliers, and we first just did a check on spend.
Amazing. I think that answers our question perfectly. The next one I think we already tackled. When is the switch from SBTi? When is it switched to SBTi 2.0? Oliver, you'd already talked about this. The next question is, what is the consequences if we don't reduce emissions in 1 year after we set up our target? Oliver, do you want to take this one?
What are the consequences? Personal guilt. There are no consequences. The consequences are SBTi isn't here to punish organizations, and we don't currently have any levers to do so. We're here to encourage organizations to take action. So from an SBTi perspective, there are no consequences. You probably see organizations decline to set new targets because they know they can't meet them. However, if you are an ambitious organization that's failed to meet your target whilst also doing everything you can to decarbonize, I think that's fine, and we just want to encourage organizations to continue to try and decarbonize. So yes, don't see it as any consequence apart from probably hopefully spurring you to greater action or feeling frustrated that you haven't been able to see greater action.
Yes, I think one of the key takeaways for me, at least from this session, is that SBTi is not there to enforce or punish, but more so as your partners in setting the right direction. I think we won't be able to cover all the questions. There are plenty, but thank you so much for all of you for such an interesting, insightful discussion, for covering questions. For the audience members, we will be sending follow-up answers to these questions, correct, Robert? And
Yes.
So you will be able to get a chance to have all your questions answered. And again, thank you for everyone for joining. Thank you to all the panel members. And Robert, over to you to conclude the session.
Yeah, so first off, Susanne, Ollie and Leon, We're very grateful to have you on today's expert panel. I'm pretty sure we delivered some practical advice for everyone who dialed in. For people who are interested in our next webinar, which you guys voted on leadership buy-in, Adam, our marketing lead, will share a link now in the chat box where you can already sign up so that you are in the loop for next month's webinar. Other than that, we will follow up with the recording as well within 48 hours. But again, perfectly on time. I just want to thank the panelists, also you, Farah, for a great session. And then I wish everyone a great rest of their day. So that's it.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Have a great day. See you next time.